All right, this is our last set of notes for ecology. A lot of people will start with succession because they'll want to talk about how an ecosystem gets started. I'm I'm ending with it because you'll understand that in seeing how all these different cycles and components contribute to how an ecosystem and a community function, and you can really appreciate that succession takes quite a bit of time to help develop these really well established communities of organisms and ecosystems. So, anyway, here we are, last section of notes. We're going to first start with primary succession. So, when you're talking about an ecosystem, it has to start somewhere, and um, we could think it starts from a brand new beginning of bare rock, but it could also be that something, maybe a fire or there's some disaster that has devastated an area and the area is starting over. So primary succession begins when bare rock forms, either by maybe there's just an area where new rock has been exposed, maybe it's been burnt by a fire or a flood has washed it away. But bare rock forms due to possibly even a volcanic eruption or due to a glacier retreat. These rocks do not have organic material from dead animals or plants present on them. So there's no organic material present from dead animals or plants. There's no nutrient-rich soil for plant growth. Okay, so that's where we start. That's the beginning of primary succession. So the first species that you find that will settle and grow on new rock formations are called pioneer species. Pioneers are often lichens. And we know and learned that lichens are a composite organism made of algae and fungus or fungi that grow together as one. So that's that symbiotic relationship, that mutualism relationship between algae and fungus that grow together as one. It obtains water and nutrients from the atmosphere, and the algae produces carbohydrates through photosynthesis. Okay, that's the second step in that primary succession. All right, third step. Soil forms as lichens break down into smaller particles. Organic material from dead organisms increases in the soil. Early colonizing plants are often nitrogen fixing species that increase the nitrogen content of the soil. With soil, grasses, ferns, and herbs can now grow, which provide a habitat for insects and small animals. Okay. Once the soil has more organic material, that builds up with decomposing material from other dead organisms, larger plants like shrubs and trees can grow in the area. More animals are then attracted to the area, and once a steady state in the ecosystem is established, scientists say a climax community has been reached. Scientists will say that this climax community or primary succession, the whole process can take up to 1,800 years to reach a climax community status. Okay, flip on to the back. So that was all primary succession, starting from bare rock to a climax community. Secondary succession is slightly different than that. So secondary succession begins after an event that reduces an established ecosystem to a smaller population or on an already established soil. So this is starting from established soil. These events could be something like a hurricane, tornado, a small forest fire, or a large one, or land that was farmed but then abandoned. To grow wild again. Make sure you guys can see that. Okay, so that's pretty good. After the initial event, there may already be seeds, roots, underground parts of plants that can begin to grow back. Grasses and other small plants start growing first. So we're just on primary succession, we're starting with basically nothing. With secondary, we're starting with some seeds, some roots, some plant parts, soil, some decomposed things. And then from there, we kind of follow the same path as we did with primary. So now we have these grasses and other small plants, and slower growing shrubs and trees begin growing again in the area. Often small pines grow first. Their cones with seeds may be more resistant to forest fire and be able to grow faster initially. Larger trees begin to grow again, and a climax community is reached. The community remains relatively stable until another disturbance, a disaster of some sort, or fire occurs. So organisms will take advantage of succession and adapt, but forest fires can increase carbon dioxide in the air and can have a negative impact on the environment. However, some types of pine actually have adapted to only disperse its seeds after a forest fire. The species has adapted to take advantage of cleared land after a forest fire. It's called the knob cone pine. That's an example of one, knob cone pine. So the seeds actually get dispersed when they get really hot in a fire. Then the seeds pop out of the cone, and that's what allows it to spread. Secondary succession, scientists say secondary succession can take up to 300 years for the ecosystem to recover back to a steady climax community. Oops. All right, and the last page. All right. Once again, how do we impact this? What comes of all this? Of course, as I said before, we do have an impact on our ecosystems and nature, but we also need to recognize that God is in control of these things, and He planned for this. He knew what was going to happen. But we do have an impact on biodiversity. So species are going extinct at an alarming rate. But species are always going extinct. But sometimes we feel like we're losing more than what we should be. Scientists believe that 58% of the biodiversity since 1970 has been lost. This study was done in 2016. Again, this is scientists' take on these things. The most diverse places on Earth are the tropical rainforest, and the coral reef. Habitat destruction in these places has a large role in the extinctions. As we populate the earth more, there is less space for animals to have an adequate habitat. So we do need to be aware of the space that we are taking up. There's something called edge effects. So even if we do not destroy a forest itself, what we build near it can affect the community that lives there. On the edges of ecosystems, human activity affects the temperature, changes the nutrient content, and sunlight exposure. Of the neighboring ecosystem, and introduces air and water pollution that flows into the nearby forest ecosystems. The type of species that start to inhabit the edge may be different from the community that would normally live in that forest. We also, and again, there's some level of, well, this happens naturally because we are living in an area and it is what it is. But this next topic is something I think of when we meddle or manipulate the environment to try to play God. So there's sometimes an introduction of invasive species, so either accidentally or on purpose. Scientists or humans can introduce invasive species into an ecosystem. So when humans release pets or household plants into the wild, they can have a negative impact on the surrounding ecosystem. Invasive species are species that are not native to a specific location. Some non-native species never reach high enough population densities to have a negative effect. Some invasive plants can outcrowd native species. Some invasive animals do not have a predator and can cause the extinction of a native species. That they outcompete or consume. Some examples of this are, maybe you've heard, but the Burmese, Burmese python was introduced in Florida because people had them as pets and then released them when they got too big because they get gigantic. And now Florida's swampland area, the wetlands are just infested with these Burmese pythons. They are definitely invasive. You also have something, the zebra mussels. The zebra mussels were a big problem as well. And another one is Caulerpa, which is a killer algae. There's lots of others. You could spend a good part of a day researching invasive species. There's even a spider that was brought over in some shipping containers from China and is now in the Brazelton area. I already forget what it was called, but it's this big black and yellow spider. It looks a lot like our garden spider, but they are quite large, and they're building these huge sticky webs, and they're very big. So they've been considered an invasive species. But anyway, so these are your notes for ecology. Finish the last homework page that goes along with this, and enjoy your Easter weekend.